I'm Lauren. I am a marketing UX research consultant, and I have known a lot of accessibility proponents in the UX community. And designers and programmers have been talking about this for years, but I feel like researchers have not. And I have the feeling that that needs to change. And I'd like this to be the start of that change. So before we begin, I just want to thank my friends and accessibility professionals, Mary Elizabeth Sullivan and Glenda Sims, for their valued input. This presentation would not be possible without them. So we're going to be going over understanding disabilities, people with disabilities as a market, the legal implications of disabled exclusion, why we should be making research inclusive beyond just the legal components, and then also how we go about doing that. So my experience with disability is indirect. This is Cherry. She is my neighbor, and I met her because her partner was friends with my partner, and they looked at the same condo that we did, and they knew that we had gotten there first, and so they were just like, you know, we don't want a part of that, so we're just gonna let them have that beautiful place, and we'll just find someplace else. We were super grateful for that, so as soon as another unit in our building became available, we let them know, and now they're our neighbors. And so when Cherry moved in, she was a very successful fine artist and photographer. She was also very open about having ADHD and being on the spectrum. But after she moved in, she changed. She had to step away from art, and she focused her energy on gaming. She started to stream on Twitch, and she gained a following rivaling her days as an artist. The reason why she had to step away from art is because her health had deteriorated after she moved in, and gaming provided an outlet of physical distraction. She was experiencing chronic pain, fatigue, the inability to digest food, failing motor skills, and an overall loss of strength. Eventually, she was diagnosed with a rare mast cell and connective tissue disorder. She then had a feeding tube installed, and she now has a wheelchair to aid in building her strength and independence. She has since had the feeding tube removed, and she's able to eat and digest food on her own, which is a really, really great progress for her. So while she may not be able to continue as an artist, she is making up for it by fiercely advocating for people with disabilities on social media. She also speaks at game conferences on making games accessible. And then she also is a full-time consultant with Ubisoft in Montreal on making their games accessible. She is also, by having her in my life and having her just in my general vicinity, following her on social media, she has made me much more aware of just the daily struggles and indignities that people with disabilities experience. And so that's been really helpful to me. It's really helped me be more aware of that in this world, and something that I should be doing something about. What I'm trying to get at is that disability is not a novelty experience. Everyone has a disability experience in one form or another. It may be direct or it may be indirect. What counts is, what is your definition of disability? Are you able to see people that you know who are in your life as having a disability? So let's talk about what disabilities are. So disability is a complicated label, but categorizing it makes it much easier to understand. There are physical disabilities that affect mobility, dexterity, and include the loss of limbs. There are visual impairments. Now, very few blind people can't see anything at all, and it can be caused by a lot of different factors. So it can range from low vision, it can range all the way to completely blind, and there's a lot in between there, and it can be innate or it can be acquired, which I'll get into later. And then there are hearing impairments, and just like visual impairments, there's a wide range of hearing impairments as well, and a person doesn't have to be completely deaf in order to be hearing impaired. There are also cognitive disabilities. Now, this is probably the most complex and least understood form of disabilities. There are neurological disabilities, which include things like epilepsy. Cognitive disabilities can affect a person's ability to learn, process, or communicate information. And then there are psychiatric forms of cognitive disability, which include stress, depression, bipolar disorder, and anxiety. And then there's speech. So people who have trouble communicating by talking, this can mean falls under speech. And this can mean anything from not being able to talk to having a stutter. And speech was not really on the radar of web accessibility professionals until recently, now that there's so many voice interfaces on different devices. And that is really can be very inaccessible to people who may have a speech impairment. So that's something that we need to think about now as well. So people don't necessarily fit under one specific category. They often fit under multiple categories. And disabilities that people experience are not always visible. So just because you cannot see or cannot detect someone with disability does not mean that it isn't there. So let's go deeper into variation. And so for visual impairments, for example, someone can be colorblind. And colorblind usually affects men. About 1 in every 9 men are colorblind. And that usually falls into the realm of they have a trouble distinguishing between red and green and detecting those colors. Then there is low vision, which can just mean glasses. That is also, and that's very common for people as they get older. But then there is legal blindness, and legal blindness means that you can detect shapes and forms, and you probably need a really strong glass description in order to discern anything more than that. But you are not completely blind. You can still see. You just can't see very clearly. And then there is complete blindness, which is what we know is you can't see anything at all. Okay, and then some of these can be innate, which means that you are born with them, or it can be acquired, meaning that you got them later in life. And the boundaries between all these categories are blurred. There's no reason why you can't qualify for multiples of these, or someone can have a mix of these factors. So disability can be viewed as a continuum, and I really like how Microsoft thinks about disability, and I like how they are trying to promote and integrate this system of universal design, because universal design can benefit everyone. It can benefit someone with a permanent disability, which means they lost their arm. And in the same realm, they can design something that works for someone with a temporary disability, which is a broken arm, or something that works for a situational disability like carrying a heavy bag. All of those things mean that you cannot use one of your limbs. And if you design something that works for one person, say you specifically design something for someone with a permanent disability, that means that someone with a temporary or a situational disability can use that as well. So let's talk about the market, because unfortunately it can't just be about doing the right thing. There has to be some kind of financial incentive. So 40 million Americans identify as having a disability. That is 6.2% of the population. And 50% of people over the age of 75 identify as having a disability. Then 6 million Canadians identify as being disabled. That is 20% of the population. And 38% of people over the age of 65 identify as having a disability. Now, I have an asterisk by able-bodied for both populations because people can technically have a disability without identifying themselves as such. The number could actually be much bigger, but we can't provide accurate statistics because of this self-identification factor. In fact, I once gave this talk at a conference, and someone in the audience who was deaf, she kind of called me out. She was just she was a bit offended that I had included deafness as a disability. Now, she didn't view it that way. She considered it to be more of a language barrier, which in that sense, absolutely true. I can't communicate with her any better than I can communicate with someone who only speaks Russian or someone who only speaks Chinese. So that is a completely valid way to interpret her situation. Now, she may technically fall under the label of having a disability, but she doesn't have to view herself that way, and she doesn't have to consider herself that way. And that's completely her right to do. We should also think that this is a huge market. So people with disabilities as a market is comparable or even greater than that at other niche markets that our clients and stakeholders tend to pay great attention to. So as you can see here, Americans with disabilities has a disposable income of $490 billion. And then African Americans has only slightly more with $501 billion. When we look at Canadians with disabilities, they're at the top with $55 billion, and then Chinese Canadians are very close behind at $53 billion. So these are things we always think about, like minority populations as things we have to serve, but we don't think of Canadians with disabilities as another one of those minority populations that also have a lot of potential in serving. Also, when we're thinking about these numbers, this is just the disposable income of people with disabilities. It doesn't count the people in their lives who may be fully able-bodied, but really take to heart what brands and services do to help the people in their lives. They are more likely to remain loyal to or patron services that actually break down the barriers for the people with disabilities in their lives rather than create them. So think about that as well. It's not just about this dollars, it's about all the dollars that's connected to it as well. The market is also guaranteed to increase with age. So 2% of toddlers have a disability. That increases to 12% of school-age children, and then it jumps to 21% of people over the age of 15, and 50% of people over the age of 65. The older people are, the more likely they are to be disabled and therefore benefit from some form of accommodation. And if you pay attention to any demographics, or if you're a researcher like myself and you're just aware of demographic changes in general, you should know that the global population on average is graying over time. It is an aging population. There are more people who are older than there are that are younger. And this is increasing with time. So this is like a guaranteed growth market that you can tap into. So what are the legal implications? So there are some like actual serious liabilities to not being accessible. So the Americans with Disability Act was created in 1990, and it means that people with disabilities cannot be discriminated against for jobs, education, transit, public space, and as of recently, that also means the web. Web is considered the public space. We are obligated to remove undue burdens against inclusion, and we have to be able to prove that we tried. And in the case of research, I think that a lot of researchers would be very hard pressed to prove that they really tried to include people with disabilities in their research. So in Canada, there are accessibility laws in specific provinces. So Nova Scotia has accessibility laws, Manitoba, and Ontario as well. But federally, Canada has been a little late to the accessibility party. So the Accessible Canada Act was just passed in Parliament and received royal assent in June of 2019. Canada will now develop federally mandated accessibility standards through the Canadian Accessibility Standards Development Organization, which is staffed by people with disabilities. It's a really great example of nothing for us without us. Don't try to help people without involving people, or don't try to design for people without involving them in the process. And the Accessibility Commissioner will enforce the new standards once they've been developed. So under the ADA, lawsuits against websites for lacking accessibility have been happening since 2008, but they are increasing. As you can see here, there were only 814 lawsuits on web accessibility in the United States, and that jumped almost 300% in 2019 to 2,408. So if suddenly the company you work for or a company you know about is suddenly really concerned about accessibility, there's a really good reason for that. And it's because there's a lot of lawsuits and they are being found legally liable to make their websites and services accessible. So once you learn about accessibility, you kind of see the lack of it everywhere. And that means high tables and bench seating at restaurants that do not accommodate someone with a wheelchair. It means public restrooms that are super small or can't be accessed. It is sidewalks that are really uneven or lack curb cutouts. It is building entrances with stairs instead of ramps. We don't have to think about these things because to us, these are just, to us as able-bodied people, these are just inconveniences. These are not things that hinder or indignify us or make things impossible for us in any way. That is a privilege. And we need to start recognizing this as a privilege, and we have to create a space where people can access these things all together. And that means making spaces for people with disabilities to access the same things that we do. And that could mean something as simple as being able to walk down a sidewalk. So when I think about doing inclusive research, I think of it as an opportunity and not simply a kindness. There are many sectors and situations which can benefit from involving people with disabilities in both generative and evaluative research. If there's anything to learn from the past few years in media and current events, it is that visibility matters. It is difficult to build or account for scenarios you do not know about or have never seen. It is really unfair to expect product teams to design and build for accessible situations if they have never seen someone with accessibility issues having a problem with it. So we need to start bringing those edge cases, what we normally refer to as edge cases, to the forefront of our development process. Healthcare, for instance. So people with disabilities are often excluded from healthcare research, even though they are the greater consumers of healthcare services. That is ignoring a $750 billion a year market and a quarter of all healthcare expenditures. Tech companies are increasingly getting on board. Not only do they understand non-accommodation as a liability, they recognize that solving for these edge cases makes their systems better for everyone they seek to serve. It's about that disability as a continuum. And when I was working for a telecommunications company, and this was something that I brought as an option, I was just like, hey, why don't we involve one person with a disability in all of our usability tests? What do you think of that? Everybody I talked to about that I proposed that to, was totally on board. They were excited for it. They wanted to see that happen, especially the designers, because the designers, they know that they need their designs to be accessible. And that is in their head. That has been ingrained in their heads. And so they design to be accessible, but they don't ever see it in action. And so being able to see a usability test go really well or really poorly for someone with a disability is really powerful. And they really look forward to seeing that. Governments also need to be accountable to all of their constituents. Ignoring the disabled community can cause huge backlashes during policy implementations. Take straw bans, for example. So the able-bodied community just saw banning straws as kind of no big deal. It's just like, great, I have to either bring my own straw. Yeah, I can bring my own straw, sip from the cup. I can sip from the cup. But the disabled community mobilized and vocalized how much they depend on straws to drink fluids. For them, it is not a matter of convenience, it is a matter of their health and survival. They cannot drink without a straw. And they are already overburdened as it is, and bringing their own stuff, their own utensils, their own straws, their own cleaning equipment for straws, that's a huge burden on them. So in effect, straw bans were then softened so that you can go to the counter and say, I would like a straw with my order, and get a straw rather than seating it automatically. There's still a bit of an indignity there because someone with a disability has to ask for something that they should automatically get, but it is better than nothing. Now, a lot of our clients and stakeholders are looking to innovate into the next great product. You know, innovation, it's a big term now. Everybody's just like, we're gonna innovate this, we're gonna innovate that. Now, finding creative workshop and research participants can be key to successful innovation. People with disabilities tend to work their creative muscles far harder than that of able-bodied people. They make great participants for these types of events. Now, working on the next great snack package is small potatoes compared to what people with disabilities will encounter on a daily basis. Take humorist David Rakoff, for example. His disability was acquired, meaning he wasn't born with a paralyzed arm. The nerves in his arm died after being treated with aggressive radiation for cancer. He had to learn to adapt and got creative to keep living his life. So I'm going to show you a video of Mr. Rakoff.
If I retained anything from dancing, it's a physical precision that certainly helps in my new daily one-armed tasks. They're the same as my old two-armed chores. They're not epic or horrifying. Some of them don't even take that much longer, but they're all to one degree or another more annoying than they used to be, requiring planning, strategy, and a certain enhanced gracefulness. Oral hygiene. Hold the handle of the toothbrush between your teeth the way FDR or Burgess Meredith playing the Penguin bit down on their cigarette holders. Put the toothpaste on the brush, recap the tube, put it away. You really have to keep things tidy because if they pile up, you'll just be in the soup. Then reverse the brush and put the bristles in your mouth. Proceed. Washing your right arm. Soap up your right thigh in the shower. Put your foot up on the edge of the tub, and then move your arm over your soapy lower limb, back and forth like an old-timey barbershop razor strop. Grating cheese. Get a pot with a looped handle, the heavier the better. This will anchor the bowl that you want the cheese to go into. Put the bowl into the pot. Now, take a wooden spoon and feed it through the handle of the grater and the loop of the pot, and then tuck the end down into the waistband of your jeans. Clean underpants are a good idea. Jam yourself up against the kitchen counter and go to town. Special kitchen note. Always, always, always have your bum hand safely out of the way, preferably in a sling, since you now have a limb that you could literally, no joke, cook on the stove without even knowing it. Which makes me feel not like a freak exactly, but, well, actually like a freak.
Okay, so a study by the Center for Inclusive Design in Australia showed that adding inclusive design elements later can increase development costs by 10,000 times in comparison to a product designed to be inclusive from the very beginning. Think about that. Think about all those lawsuits that I mentioned earlier. So now there is like some kind of legal penalty for losing a lawsuit on accessibility. So there's a fine, there is some kind of award to the plaintiff, etc. But now that company that was found itself to be inaccessible now has to suddenly make their product that was inaccessible accessible. And that is a huge time and cost sink to that company that they were not prepared to do. So think about that when you are developing new products and services. It needs to be accessible from the very beginning. And the best way to do that is to surface people with disabilities in the discovery process. So I've talked a lot about reasons why we should be making research inclusive. Let's talk about the how. So I'm going to be giving you just enough information to make you feel capable. It's going to be like going down a playground slide. You're going to get up there, you're going to go, oh, this is no big deal. It's totally easy. I can do this. But then you're going to realize that slide goes off a cliff. And there, that is me. I am struggling. I'm flailing. I am doing my best. I am trying, but I mess up all the time. And that is okay, because I think that the mitzvah, the good thing, is in the trying. So you're going to get overwhelmed quickly. We all do. But we need to think about this as the start of our inclusive research journey. There's a lot more to do, and there's a lot more road ahead to travel. And it's okay if we stumble along the way. So we can make research inclusive by minding our manners, designing research inclusively, being accommodating, and being willing to modify. Let's start with minding our manners. How do we interact with people? Because sometimes that's the scary part, is like, oh, I don't know how to, what if I say something wrong? What if I offend them? What if I do something wrong? There's some basic etiquette that you can know that can get around that. So let's start there. So there's two different kinds of language approaches to referring to people with disabilities. There is identity language, which is referring to the person by their disability. And some people enjoy and prefer identity language: autistic, blind, diabetic, paraplegic. The more widely accepted language is person-first language. That is putting the person before their disability. So instead of autistic, it is person with autism. Instead of paraplegic, it's person with paraplegia. So, but remember, there are preferences there. So like I said, there are no universal rules for how to refer or address people with disabilities. So if you are not sure, which you're most likely not, you should be asking them what they would prefer. So there is some basic etiquette when interacting with people with disabilities. So first off, you should be speaking directly to the person, not their interpreter, not their companion, and make sure that you have their attention before you talk. So even I get this wrong. Like, I tried to approach someone who was deaf, and I first spoke to her, and her interpreter was across the table, and so the interpreter had to come over and then interpret what I said before. But then I had to turn the interpreter and kind of like say what I said, and then the person who was deaf was just like, "Hey, can you just talk to me? That'd be really great." And I was just like, haha, yes, of course, I know, yes, I know this. But see, everybody messes up, and it's okay. So you should also ask before helping them, because they may not want or need your assistance. So keep that in mind. And then also, do not touch them, their aids, or their service animals without their permission. So a lot of people consider their wheelchairs or their crutches or their canes as part of their body. It is an extension of themselves. And so touching those things without their permission is a real violation. And then also, you know, service animals, they're adorbs. Who doesn't want to pet the dog? But that dog is working. So, you know, don't pet the dog. And also be patient when you're talking with someone who has trouble communicating. So they're going to get there. Just give them the room and just be patient and wait. They will be able to communicate what you want. Then also, if you don't know how to help someone, if you don't know how to assist someone, if you don't know how to interact with someone, ask. Always be asking. It is okay to ask. So how do we incorporate this principles of inclusive and accessible design to research? So let's start with recruiting, because every study begins with recruiting. How do we get people with disabilities into the room to answer our surveys? So you can go it alone if you have the time but not the budget, and there are lots of options on social media and through advocacy groups. So there's Twitter and Instagram hashtags. You can see here, there is the accessibility kind of condensed hashtag of A11Y. It's A11Y because there are 11 letters in accessibility. And then there is disability awareness, and there's lots of other niche ones as well. So, you know, if you look around the disabled community on Twitter, there's a lot of variations there. Then there are Facebook groups, so things like Disability Support Group, Hidden Disability, and Scope. Then there are Reddit threads, and I've come to the conclusion that there is a Reddit thread for everything. If you want to find out people's firsthand experiences on something, there is a Reddit thread for that. I can almost guarantee it. And there are very general Reddit threads on disability, and there are very specific Reddit threads on disability. Then there are advocacy groups. So places like the National Federation of the Blind, Council of Canadians with Disabilities. All of those are really great places to find people with disabilities. Now, the problem with all of these, as someone who is an outsider looking for people to participate in a project and whatnot, is there is usually not a lot of support or say gratitude for someone just coming, for an outsider to come into these groups and go, hey, I don't necessarily have a disability, or even I do have a disability, and I would really like to find some people who are willing to participate in a study, and then getting those people and then never hearing from you again. They never heard from you before, they'd only heard from you then, and they will never hear from you again after that. So you're not really contributing to these groups, you're not really contributing to these organizations, and you are expecting help from them. Advocacy groups especially, they want an ongoing relationship with you if they want to help you. They're not necessarily interested in just helping you once and never hearing from you again. So unless you are ready and willing to maintain those relationships, I would be very cautious in approaching these kinds of groups. Now, I've worked with traditional recruiters on this. I've also worked with specialist recruiters on this, and both have their pluses and minuses. So traditional recruiters are so accustomed to excluding people with disabilities from studies that people with disabilities in their database tend to be on the mild side. So this can be changed with time and understanding of expectations, but it's going to take some work on our part. Then specialists can provide people with severe disabilities, but they're not used to being flexible or properly screening and preparing their participants to participate in a study. So that's another area where there is some work for us to do as well. But those specialists are much more able to maintain those ongoing relationships with those groups and those advocacy organizations that I mentioned in the previous slide. So if you run research and usability tests like I have on a regular basis, you will want to try to save the interview with the person with the disability for the very last. At that point, you will know the guide through and through, and you'll be able to be more flexible during the session. Now, if you are working with people with varying levels of disability, you'll want to save the more challenging ones for last for the exact same reasons. So let's see. When you are screening for people with disabilities, you have to trust people to self-identify. Their disability is their business. Let them describe and define how they are disabled and then work from there. Remember, not everyone who is disabled will identify that way. So keep that in mind when you are writing these screeners. So the first time I did this, I just had those first two questions. Are you disabled, and how would you describe your disability? And the first person I was sent for a usability test was someone who had lupus and two knee replacements. Now, that person was absolutely disabled. I don't disagree with that at all. Definitely disabled. But unfortunately, I was trying to test a mobile device, and she wasn't disabled in a way that would affect her ability to use that device or that interface. So then I started including this question, which is an additional screening question. It's kind of a qualifier of, does your disability make any of the following tasks difficult? And I had some very mundane things, but among those mundane things, I had things that were specifically important to me, using the internet or using a smartphone app. And if they said yes to either of those, then they would qualify as the disabled factor in my study. And that really helped. That actually made it much better. So you're going to want to give people enough time and information to prepare to participate. So a lot of times they're not used to doing this. They don't really know what's up. So you need to do the extra work. So try to send the instructions with the screener if you can, or send it soon after. So don't use scanned documents because a scanned document, so if you were to scan a paper document and send that, that's just a picture. And a picture can't be read by a screen reader. So if you use regular documents, so computer-generated document, you can run accessibility checkers on Microsoft Word and Adobe for PDFs. You can also allow for a way to provide consent that doesn't require a signature. So not everyone can write. I mean, I don't know about you, but when I'm asked to like draw my signature on my trackpad, I want to die. I definitely prefer typing out my name, and it's a fancy, and then I put in a fancy font, and like that qualifies as a signature. I'm just like, sure, whatever floats you. But why can't we do the same for when we are doing, for when we're running, when trying to get consent forms? So also think about how you can present your instructions in multiple formats. So if you can do all this, that is great. You get a gold star. Because some people respond better to written instructions. Other people need to hear what they need to do, and then other people need to be shown what they need to do. And if you can do all three, then you're covering all your bases. So when we're thinking about how to do visual instructions, we can think about IKEA instructions as kind of like the gold standard. Simple line drawings and symbols can really help people with cognitive disabilities, but it goes beyond that. It's not just people with cognitive disabilities, it's also people who are really pressed for time and don't have time to think and to sit there and go through your very detailed instructions that you painstakingly wrote. They just want to be able to skim and get through it. So this works for them as well. When we think about IKEA instructions, they're awesome. They can get you to put together an entire dresser without them communicating a single word in any language. That's amazing. So how can we apply that kind of thinking to our instructions for research participation? So here, words and symbols are really great together. I mean, that's like the chocolate and peanut butter of communication. So here, this is an example, and this is just rough. This isn't something that I would say, yeah, you should totally use this. I think that you should use this and like go beyond and do more. But we have a symbol, 2 p.m. on Monday. You will need a computer, strong Wi-Fi, a quiet space, and earbuds. And then using your Chrome browser, you will go to this link. This will help people with a cognitive disability understand what I'm trying to get across without having to read and comprehend paragraph upon paragraph of instructions. So how do we make surveys inclusive? Because if we're excluding people with disabilities, that's not a representative sample, and we are doing our clients and our stakeholders an injustice. So first off, we should be asking our platform vendor So survey platform vendors, if their platform is WCAG compliant. There is 2.1A and AA WCAG standards, or WCAG, that they should be meeting. So if you want to find out what you're trying to find out is if the underlying technology is accessible. You will be surprised how often it is not. They don't tend to think about this. We need to put pressure on vendors to make their platforms accessible. It is on us because we are the ones paying for it. Now, a lot of survey platforms offer customization options. That makes the survey programmer, the person actually writing and programming the survey, the last line of defense of accessibility. So you can use an online tool to make sure your color contrast between text, links, and buttons are strong enough. Now, for screen readers to detect something as related, such as a set of questions or answer options, they have to be close together. Because if they're not, then people using magnifying functions will have a tendency to get lost in all the white space in between. You also want to make sure that error messages make it clear how you expect people to format their answers to your questions, and that error messages appear above the question so that assistive devices recognize them as connected. Remember, words and pictures are better together, so use words with symbols and symbols with words to assist with navigation and comprehension. Now, when you're programming your survey, I recommend that you play it safe if you can and just use the simplest question formats. Check boxes, radio buttons, open ends. If you can stick to those three, you're safe. But it is awfully fun to program sliders and drag and drops on the chance that they'll boost your engagement. But what if by doing so, you're excluding 6% of your respondents? So think about it. How does someone who can't use a mouse or a trackpad drag and drop something into the appropriate space? It's not easy. It's not even possible, I think. And you can also check with your provider to see if any question types or features are not compatible with assistive devices. Ask those questions, pressure those vendors. So let's think about qualitative, and it can be in person and it can also be online. We also need to think about ADA and then also ACA and WCAG compliance in all of those situations as well. So sure, I mean, your platforms can say they're accessible, and that they work with assistive devices, but you probably also want to test it out and make sure. So ask participants what assistive aids they'll be using during the session before they arrive, and then check with your provider to see if that platform is compatible. Or you can also get a sample of that or download the free version of something, of a screen reader, and get that as well. You will save yourself a world of hurt if you know if it's incompatible in advance. So if you are conducting research at a facility, you should be expecting to pay a higher incentive because it's harder for them to make the journey. And don't just take the facility's word that they're accessible, ask for proof. So my neighbor and her partner, when they want to try a new restaurant, they'll call ahead, they'll make a reservation if they need to, and they will ask, do you accommodate wheelchairs? And the host will invariably say, oh yes, of course we do, can't wait to see you at 7. And then they'll get there and they'll see stairs to get in. They'll see an overcrowded layout. They'll see high tables. They'll see bench seating. They'll see a bathroom they can't even get to. And then they have to turn around and go someplace else. And that's really disappointing. That really sucks. And I don't think that that host was being malicious by telling them that they could accommodate a wheelchair. I think that host just didn't know any better. And I wouldn't expect someone at a facility to know any better either. It's not on their radar. It's not necessarily their job. So trust but verify. But if you can go remote, do it. It's just a whole lot easier that way. So when I was running regular usability tests for the telco, it would be 5 people in person and then 1 person with a disability who I'd interview remotely. And so that really helped. So ways you can verify is by checking the room to make sure it can accommodate wheelchairs. So in the hallways, you want a minimum of 36 inches in the hall or 32 inches for a door. You want a minimum clear space for a T-shaped turn, so a 3-point turn of 180 degrees. You want 36 inches in all directions in order for that person in a wheelchair to turn around. You also want to think, are the tables high enough? Are they height adjustable? So an accessible table has a surface height of no more than 34 inches and no less than 28 inches above the floor. At least 27 inches of knee clearance must be provided between the floor and the underside of the table for it to be considered accessible. Now, also, are the hallways wide enough? Do you have that 36 inches of clearance? What about the bathroom? Is the bathroom accessible? Does it also have that same amount of width and clearance? Does it have bars for people to support themselves when they use the bathroom? And then also, where are the elevators? Can they take those instead of stairs? Are they even accessible? Can they get to them? Where are the automatic doors? Can they get to the automatic doors? How far out of the way is it? Is it even out of the way? Where's the accessible parking? Where's the public transit access? Document all these things so that that can be part of your instructions. So here we are. Give your detailed arrival instructions. So all those things about checking the facility, you can incorporate all of that into the arrival instructions. So how to get to the right bathroom, which doors are automatic, how to get to them, where's the elevator, where are the nearest parking spots for people with disabilities, where's the nearest public transit access point. All of those things will matter greatly to people with disabilities and show that you're making that effort to accommodate them. So when we are considering research software or we are considering facilities, whether that be qualitative or quantitative, we should be asking about ADA or WCAG 2.1 compliance. Research service providers will start taking this seriously when we ask them to. Remember what I said, we are the ones with the money. We are the ones hiring them. We are the ones paying them. They will listen to what we want. So how do we make the stimuli that we're using inclusive? So remember, not everyone can read your words and not everyone can see your pictures. So combine the two using captions, alt text, and picture descriptions, as well as videos and audio text can be better for everyone. So when I'm talking about captions, I'm talking specifically about captions, not subtitles. So if you notice in the video that I showed you earlier, I also captioned things like laughter, applause, tepid laughter. All of those things matter to the experience. So when you are doing video captions, make sure that you're also notating things like creepy music, slamming doors, anything like that that contributes to the feel of the movie being seen. And then alt text, you'll want to do alternative text descriptions so that when people hover over pictures, a kind of a description pops up of what the picture is for people who are blind. So now people who can't hear may consider sign language to be their native language and written English to be their second language. This may mean they don't have advanced reading comprehension. So keeping your language plain and easy will make it easier for people, but also immigrants who don't consider English to be their primary language. So think about that as well. Fix it for one, fix it for all. So you can run your text through things like the Hemingway app to just make sure it is a very basic plain language level and get suggestions for how to fix it if it's not. Okay. So some people are very sensitive to different stimuli. So there are some people that if they hear like a loud noise or a loud flash or something, anything like out of the ordinary, they are just done for the rest of the day. They can't go on. So be very aware of that when you're showing people stimuli. If there is anything that has sudden loud noises or flashing lights, give participants a heads up in the ability to opt out, because that is just a courtesy. How can we be more accommodating? So recognize that you are not superhuman. You have limitations. Are there disabilities that you as a moderator cannot accommodate? So for one thing, I don't know sign language, so therefore I can't do research with people who have a hearing impairment and can't communicate with people who hear. So in that case, I could always ask, do they have an interpreter that they can bring with them? I can also see if I have budget to hire an interpreter, but I'm gonna need a heads up to know that that's happening and I may not be able to make it work. Is any of the technology that we're using not compatible with assistive devices? So often prototypes are created with software that isn't compatible with screen readers, meaning that we can't test prototypes with people who are blind. Are any of the facilities that we're using inaccessible? So if you can't accommodate someone in a wheelchair, you should be making that known in the screener so that the recruiter doesn't recruit someone who can't participate in your study and experiences a difficulty or an indignity. So what about their limitations? What can you do to meet them halfway? Now, if they have a communication impairment, you can shorten the discussion guide to only what you absolutely need answers for. If they have a visual impairment, can you create alternatives to visual stimuli? And if they have trouble getting around, offer to go to them if it has to be in person, or offer to use video chat. So again, at the telco, they were trying to learn about home automation experiences. And they were just like, we really would like to get people with disabilities to talk about their experience with home automation. But we're not really sure how to get them to the facility and talk to them. And I'm just like, that's okay. Why don't you just go to them? And they're just like, we can do that. I'm just like, yes, you can do that. So they were really excited about the opportunity that they might be able to go to someone's house and see how they live and how they work with devices that already exist, and how they might be able to make those devices even more helpful for them. How can you be a great host? So provide or exchange contact information in compliance with privacy laws. It is good for you to be able to reach them if they start to run late. It is great for them to reach you if they're having trouble getting to the facility and need some assistance. You also want to be really aware of your routine when you're interviewing someone who is severely disabled. You want to be careful about what you share during rapport building and at other times during the discussion to avoid coming across as ableist. So in my usual rapport building, what I'll do is I'll talk about, so what do you like to do in your spare time? And I'll go first and I'll say, well, I started running. It's new for me. I haven't done it a lot, but I found a way to do it that doesn't make me feel like I want to die. And I also, I say that I like to do volunteer work that involves physical labor. So I like parking bikes at events so that people will ride their bike to the event rather than take a car. Or I do shoreline cleanup and I pick up trash on the beach. Those are all things that I like to do in my spare time. It makes me feel good. But I was interviewing someone who had severe cerebral palsy and was wheelchair bound. I wasn't going to connect with him with those stories. So I just had to think fast. And I was just like, hey, this is the TV show that I'm binging on right now. And I really enjoy it. It's trashy, but it's great. I find it to be very bingeable. I just kind of scream right through it. And it's good to be able to kind of scan on my phone while I'm watching it. And, I don't really have to care about it that much, but I find it very entertaining. And then he was able to talk to me about what kind of media he was consuming at the time that he really liked. Then we also want to think about how we approach the subject of their disability during the session. Now, hopefully you won't have to do this. You can just focus on the difficulty they're having without having discussed the fact that they are disabled and avoid that discussion entirely. But you may be in a situation where you do have to do that. Unfortunately, we do not have good vocabulary around talking about disability with someone who is disabled. So it's a bit of a minefield. So approach that subject with a lot of care. How can we be more willing to modify? Have backup plans. So we can plan for all of the potential events we can foresee. So, do some reverse brainstorming and figure out what are all the ways that this could possibly go wrong. We already use floaters. So if someone doesn't show up, we have a floater in the wings just in case, so we can still get our minimum number of participants. But what about jerry-rigged platforms as a backup? So the platform we have a license for isn't working for the participant, but we know that Zoom works really well. So why can't we just switch over to Zoom? Then we can also test the platform we're going to be using with a free trial version of a screen reader to ensure that it is indeed compatible, or have that ready to go if we are doing an in-person usability test and they're not bringing their own device. You also want to get ready to change on the fly. We are all getting used to this, and there will be events we simply cannot foresee. Stay agile and flexible and find ways to make it work despite the circumstances. Ooh, that did not go. Ooh. Okay. Also, allow for the session to go long. So research sessions can be exhausting even for most able-bodied people. So allow for enough time in between sessions to go overtime if you have to, and also give lots of chances to take breaks in between topics so that people can regain their strength and composure. So inclusivity is really part of the zeitgeist right now. Companies are being forced to reconcile with being inaccessible after passing new laws and all those lawsuits that I mentioned earlier. We rarely, as researchers, get the opportunity to do something that is both good for business and just plain good, and we should be embracing this. In fact, I'd like to go a step further. We should be normalizing this. This should be a normal part of our research routine. Remember, this is hard, but I expect to be in a constant state of failure, and you should too, and that's okay, because it's important that we all keep trying and that we keep trying to push this forward. It's not going to happen if we don't do that. So thank you.